The Joe Rogan Experience.
Thank you for understanding that. I forgot about Cecil. But like when we were first monitoring the wolves in Glacier, there was just a handful, and we would catch them. And we would give them names because it's easier. Like Phyllis was Wolf 8550 and Mojave was Wolf 8963. They had both names and numbers. And so when we did our scientific papers and reports, we used a number because we were told by the officials that we don't want you to name the animals because what happens when Phyllis kills a cow, if that happens?
Right.
Then you can't manage Phyllis. So we went along with it, but we used the names and we did the scientific stuff with numbers. But then when you go into the park, people would want to know what's going on. You talk about these different wolf numbers, 8654, and they say, well, who is that? Oh, that's Aspen. Oh, yeah, and they would know by the name. So whatever works.
Well, then all of a sudden they become like a pet.
More
or even
so.
more like a majestic wild pet. Like it's a different thing. It's a pet that's this iconic North American, apex predator.
Yes. And I know the wolves in Yellowstone, they don't have names, they have numbers, but they're so identifiable by 907 or whatever that it becomes like a name.
Right.
Even though it's still a number.
But if you shoot 907, it's not as rude as if you shoot Jake.
Right.
Jake the wolf.
Right.
It's like, oh.
Jericho, yeah.
Yeah, or Michael. You name a wolf a human name, and all of a sudden you shouldn't shoot it anymore.
I know.
Which is just a weird anthropomorphization thing, right?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting to me because for my career, I've done everything. My first job, I worked up in northern Minnesota in a little tiny 300-person farming community, and I was hired, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to go in and help prevent livestock depredation, and when wolves killed cattle or sheep, to go in and remove, which meant trap and haul away, and they were euthanized. And when there weren't depredations, to go out and research trap and put collars on the other wolves. And it was, this was big stuff for a girl from Minneapolis, starry-eyed and pretty naive, to go up and save the folks of North Home from the wolves, Yeah. Oh, my God. It was such an important summer for me to learn professionally and personally. And I wrote about that. But I learned a lot, and it was interesting work. But I realized, wolves can cause conflicts for people. And it was a new concept for me.
So when they captured the wolves and they removed them, why did they euthanize them? Why didn't they just relocate them?
Well, they would be me, because I was the one catching and
you.
trapping them. Me.
Well, obviously someone was telling you what to do, though, right?
Right. So I had to bring them to the main office in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, where they were euthanized. So prior to that, in 1978, you couldn't euthanize wolves. They changed the status from endangered to threatened. And so when they were threatened, then under Endangered Species Act, you could actually euthanize them. And they didn't translocate them. This is a really good question, because they found over the years with studies in Minnesota and eventually in Montana too, that when you translocate or move a wolf who's causing a problem, that wolf very, very rarely survives to reproduce, because it gets killed by other wolves. It comes back to depredate again. It moves onto another farmer ranch and does it again. They don't generally survive, and so it was determined that it makes officials feel good to move them, and it's a good facade for the public to believe in, but sometimes it results in a pretty prolonged and inhumane existence for a few months or a year till they die anyway. So, it's
Is
tough.
it because they're habitualized to start preying on cattle?
It's tough once they learn to take cattle or sheep. It's tough to break that pattern. Let's put it that way.
Because it's so easy?
Well, yeah. If it was me out there walking around and I had a choice between a deer that's going to kick me in the teeth or taking the cow, I'd pick the slow, dumb groceries every time. It's just me.
Of course.
Of course.
And if they know the groceries are all penned up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult challenge, and wolves are continuing to expand everywhere in the West, the Midwest, Europe. And so there's more and more challenges, and a lot of the early excitement about wolves has changed into a bitter battle.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, complex battle, because there's a lot of hunters that do not like the reintroduction of wolves.
Yes.
And they'll say that the elk populations are down, and they're down dramatically in Montana because of the reintroduction. Which was in 1996? When did they?
95, 96, and then 96, 97. Those winters.
So. But the reality is, it's not natural to not have those predators there, and you're going to get an overpopulation of elk, and that's going to lead to starvation and disease.
Yes. And so kind of the die was cast when those wolves were removed, and basically by the 1930s, there really weren't viable populations in the West anymore. There were wolves here or there in a pack here or there, but there weren't thousands. And they went inside the national park. So they have a picture in many books of rangers with cute little wolf pups that are like 7, 8 weeks old, and they took the pictures. This was in 1926, and then they killed them all. So they even removed all the predators within national parks. So people, historic memory, we have really short memories. Mm-hmm. Historic memory of, say, for example, the northern herd range of elk out of Gardner. It was about 20,000 before the wolves were introduced. Way over carrying capacity. Elk were starving. The browse lines as high up as they could reach. They ate everything they could eat. They were paying people were being paid to come in and kill deer and elk. And then they started the late hunting seasons out of Gardner, which I went in because my boyfriend had a tag. And they just have a shooting line in February and kill all these elk because they aren't going to make it anyway. And so you shoot a starving cow in February.
Wow.
Because there wasn't predators. So then when the wolves came back, two things happened. Number one, it was a new predator. But number two, in the winter of 96, 97, we had some of the deepest snows ever recorded in the mountains, ever. And so many of the herd died from snowfall. And I've had hunters tell me, the population of elk went from 20,000 to 10,000 in 2 years. Damn those wolves. And it's like, do you think 35 wolves killed 10,000 elk? Come on, let's just do the math a minute.
Yeah, that is the problem with these people that don't have a nuanced perspective on what's happening, because they have a vested interest in it being a problem that the wolves are keeping them from being able to be successful on an elk hunt.
Right. And I'm a hunter. I get it.
Yeah. But the die-offs are huge. Like the place that I was just telling you about before the podcast that I was in Utah, they lost 80% of their mule deer population a year ago.
From what?
Snow.
Yeah. And so...
real bad winter.
Yeah.
Bad. And winter die-offs are a big thing. It's a big thing.
I would say, to the best of my knowledge as a biologist, that winter die-off is the limiting factor for ungulate herds. It's not lions and bears and wolves and humans and cars. Every so often, every 20 years or whatever, you get a massive winter die-off. And it takes quite a while for those populations to build back up.
Yeah. Predators
can keep that at a lower rate. They can not affect it. I have to think back to the people say about wolves killing all the deer and elk. And I think if you look to statistics, Montana and Wyoming, which both have had a lot of wolves for a couple decades, they're giving away more elk permits. I just was reading they proposed unlimited elk permits in Wyoming, and Montana's got basically in most of its management units more elk than ever. And I just say there's more going on than wolves. And to point your finger at wolves all the time, you need to look at habitat. You need to look at access issues. There's a lot of places where hunters want to go shoot these elk, but they're on large private ranches and you can't get on them.
Including landlocked public land where there is public land where you're allowed to hunt there, but you can't get there.
Right.
You'd have to fly in a helicopter. In a lot of places, that's illegal.
Right.
And so there's all this talk of, for people that don't know, there's one of the things that happens is a thing called corner crossing.
Yeah.
So there might be a piece of public land that you're allowed to hike into, and then there's a small area. Mm-hmm. It could be a very small area, just a few yards even, of private land that you are going to have to cross in order to get into the next piece of public land. But people block access to that because these people that have these ranches, and most of them probably don't even live there, and a bunch of wealthy people, they're terrified that someone's going to go through that and then go into their private land. They don't want to give people the access at all to their private land, so they stop these corner crossings, and it's a giant disaster because then you have these areas that are public land that should be available to all of us, and no one can get in there.
Right. I mean, if the viewers can think of imagining a checkerboard and you're trying to get from one black square to the next black square, but you have to step over a tiny piece of white square to get there, right?
Yeah.
It's being battled in court right now. And
yeah. It's a disaster. If
is.
I owned the land, I would carve out a big pathway and give it to the public.
Yeah.
Why, if you have 50,000 acres out there, whatever the hell you have, why is it so hard to take a few acres and just make a path?
But you're not most landowners.
It seems so simple.
I know.
It's like the simplest of, you just make some sort of an easement.
Well, that would be good. And some ranchers do, but many people been in this business 4 or 5 generations on their family ranch, and they've had bad experiences with hunters that come in and cut their fences, shoot their cows, leave their gates open, and they just say, I'm done. I'm closed. Yeah. And they get really angry. I just hunted on a guy's ranch about a week ago up in central Montana, and he owns 60 sections. That's 60 square miles of land, which may not be a big place in Texas, but for most of the rest of the world,
that's huge.
It's huge. And he gave us permission, but he had to tell us all the challenges he's had and why. He had a big sign, don't even ask, basically. But
right.
But I know he was going to let us because some other friends of mine had hunted there. So he had all these heartburns over things that had happened to him. Hunters gave him a really bad taste in their mouth. And I as a single individual person, can't do a lot about it. And I'd like to see, hunting organizations, many really good ones, help promote better hunter behavior and better hunter-landowner relationships. You would be very generous to do that, but most people will not give an easement.
Well, I would understand that if you've been burned a few times, if people have poached on your land,
right.
and there's this attitude that people who don't have anything and they see someone who has so much and they're like, screw this guy, I'm just going to go on his property. Look, the elk are right there over the ridge, 400 yards away.
Yep.
Let's just go over there, shoot those elk. He won't even know. Yeah. We'll pack it out.
That happens.
Yeah, and then they get caught. And
right.
then this guy's like, God damn it, they're poaching on my land. And then he hates hunters. Hunters are like everybody else.
Yep.
There's people that are amazing plumbers and they're real honest and they work hard and they're sweethearts and you're happy to hire them and call them. And there's people that are just liars and they're crooks.
It's just like any other group of people.
Anything else.
Exactly. Exactly. And I know in my business with the wolves, I've always tried to be very transparent. I'm very honest, and if somebody asks me a question, I'll give them the best information I have. If I don't know an answer, I'll say, I don't know, but you could call so-and-so who's maybe had the experience with that.
Right.
I got nothing to hide by being dishonest or trying to sell somebody. It's like hunting impacts of wolves on hunting. You look at populations and they go like this all the time. And sometimes wolves cause it, sometimes not. Sometimes it's winter. Sometimes it's accumulation of lions and bears and wolves. But it's like the stock market. People want to see it do this.
Well, it's like the climate.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to admit to that either. They hate looking at long-term data.
I know. And
when people want to talk about the sky is falling, well, it's actually not. You look at it over a long period of time, and you see this trend has always existed. And in fact, this is one of the cooler times in history.
We're facing interesting times. It's
bizarrely ideological.
I think the hardest thing is so much social media. Everything goes on instantly, and whether it's true or not.
Mm-hmm. Everything goes on instantly, and everything is ideologically connected. There's people that just don't want any animals ever killed ever, and there's people that want no predators and the easiest hunts possible, and they don't have a nuanced perspective of the ecosystem, of what biology is and what these animals, there's a whole world that they live in, and this world is like interdependent. There's so many things going on. And so people I remember there was a documentary that came out how wolves changed rivers in Yellowstone, and they made this incredibly rosy picture of wolves coming in, and it brought in beavers, and they changed the rivers and the lakes, and everything was better. And it's like, no, not really. No, there's a lot going on all the time, and to single out this one aspect of this ecosystem and say this is the cause of this. But there's a lot of different causes. There's a lot going on.
Yes, and that film or the video ran viral big time. But there's no one species that's going to make or break the world, except maybe people. But in terms of the impacts, no. And it's been shown since that video came out, the movie, that might be true in a short time period in small places, but it's not the global picture for Yellowstone Park. Wolves have not saved the planet. They just haven't. It's just not that simple.